This video is brought to you by my loyal patrons. Pledge as little as £1 a month and I do extra videos, plus additional extras for the higher tiers. Link in the description. The history of Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends is certainly interesting, with major changes happening from season to season. Welcome to the series on my channel where we dive into the production history and technical aspects of this little blue tank engine's life. However, in this episode, we have to dive into the production history of some talking tugboats before we can understand the rest of Thomas's history. This is the production of tugs. After the success of the first two seasons of Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends, producer Robert D. Cardona and director David Mitton decided to depart from Britt Allcroft in 1986 and create their own children's TV show, aimed at a slightly older audience. Meaning Thomas the Tank Engine would remain in hiatus for the foreseeable future. This wasn't a problem for Britt Allcroft, as she wanted to expand Thomas's reach globally, especially in the United States, and she began forming the idea of Shining Time Station, but we'll talk more about that in the near future. In its day, Tugs didn't have the cult following like it does today, but that doesn't mean the crew didn't put 100% into making this a successful show. During some stage of Thomas's second season, David Mitton and Robert Cardona began brainstorming their new creation. Their idea was to create a show set in a United States harbour in the early 1920s, focusing on the working industrial power of a fleet of tugboats. Tugs was going to have to be produced through Mitton and Cardona's own money, and so they created the company TUGS Limited. This company, along with Clearwater Features, would supply most of the money for the show's production. Unlike Thomas, they would be able to have a lot more creative freedom as they didn't have to follow any source material. The initial plan was for each episode to be 30 minutes long, which was incredibly longer than Thomas had or ever would be. Scripts and concept art began development to follow this runtime. Some of the original scripts depict there was going to be a narrator voicing all the characters. This was later changed to a full voice cast. A few concept ideas of how the boats would look were designed. A large portion of the crew from Thomas the Tank Engine agreed to work on tugs, as it was another job with a similar team. Mitton and Cardona knew they wanted to have moving eye mechanisms much like Thomas, but also wanted to add rotating heads to give more expression.
Well, it's all radio controlled. As you can see, we've got an 8-channel transmitter here, and there's servos inside which operate the eyes and the face. And some of the tugs have got other additions like paddle wheels which turn and sternways and things like that, so that we've got, it's all controlled by here.
Some concept ideas show the faces were initially going to be flat rather than curved. It is believed Britt Allcroft was not pleased by the concepts and news, as she felt this was too similar to Thomas the Tank Engine. She was worried Tugs' success would overpower Thomas's, resulting in Britt Allcroft filing a lawsuit against Mitton and Cardona. This would be the first time Britt and David would have a proper disagreement, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. Britt ultimately lost the lawsuit due to her trademark being for vehicles with grey faces, whilst the Tugs faces were flesh coloured. However, this would emphasise the reason the Tugs faces became curved and had square eyes rather than using round beads to highlight the differences. I will make note that it is questioned whether the lawsuit actually happened, but I mentioned it as there is some strong evidence backing up the claims. Either way, the results ultimately remain the same. And so Tugs continued its pre-production journey, and the company, TVS, a branch of ITV, agreed to join Clearwater Features in helping produce Tugs. This now meant Tugs had some extra funding. It was decided early on that Tugs would not be radio controlled. This was due to David Mitton feeling RC boats looked too toy-like and bounced around too much, resulting in the tugs being designed that they actually couldn't float on water. So, special trolley chassis were made for the tugs to balance on.
Tugs actually move quite gently. I mean, they do rock from side to side, but usually they're as solid as a rock. They go up and down a little, but they're big, heavy boats. So on the way we're shooting it, if we stick it on a trolley, it actually looks quite realistic.
Initially, these were meant to be remote controlled, but due to the tugs' weight, cables were mounted at the bottom, which would be pulled by crew members to give the illusion the boats had more weight and would cut through water naturally. Many characters had to be made for the series, and the models didn't come cheap. Each tug cost around £8,000 to complete, and in today's money, that is over £17,000. A voice cast was also assembled during this time, and over the course of pre-production and production, their lines were recorded. It was also agreed that Mike O'Donnell and Junior Campbell would also compose the music. They used the Prophet 2000 once again, but also a Roland Jupiter 6 synthesizer and a Yamaha RX5 drum machine. They also, for the first time in this series, used live recorded instruments, which included piano, bass guitar, and saxophone, which brought together that classic theme. A few variations of this theme song were also made, with Mike O'Donnell's son doing the original narration for the theme song. This was later switched to the character Captain Star. The series wasn't coming cheap, and to add to costs, the set also had to be considered. The plan was to once again film at Shepperton Studios. It had proved a useful space during the filming of Thomas the Tank Engine's second season, and the crew believed they could utilise the space to its full potential. A gigantic tank was built and filled with water. It was decided blue food colouring would be added to hide the mechanisms and cables at the bottom of the set. A filter was also added to keep the water clean. The tank measured at 45 feet by 25 feet, with a depth of 14 inches. This was such a huge scale and really allowed a whole harbour to be made.
This is in fact the miniature set for the TV series TUGS. The whole thing takes place in a tank.
Soon, everything was nearing completion, and it was almost time to start production. However, this wasn't going to be a plain sailing ride that David Mitton had envisioned. Filming for TUGS began in 1987 at Shepperton Studios, and huge wooden standees of 10 cents and zip stood at the entrance of Clearwater's stage, rather than their logo. It is unknown what month or date production began, unfortunately. The plan was to film 13 30-minute episodes.
Well, we've got now down to a 15-day turnaround. That's not allowing for the next episode to come on board. Also, it's gentle on sets.
The episodes were once again filmed via the Clearwater Periscope lens system, which had been used during Season 2 of Thomas. This is the production where the crew were able to discover the full potential of the system due to the massive sets. 2 people were required to operate the tugs, one moving the boats and the other controlling the head and eyes. Unlike Thomas, the tugs did not have smoke units built into them. Instead, smoke was produced via a smoke machine and pumped by an air compressor through a tube, which was connected to the models with a down-weighted garden hose to remain at the bottom of the tank.
We've got a smoke machine, which is piped up.
How long is the tube then that the smoke comes down?
About 15 feet. We can lengthen them, shorten them to suit. We put weights around them so they don't float around in the tank. So when it's actually in there, you don't see where the smoke comes from at all. It just comes out of the tug.
Episodes began filming on the big city port set, as this was where most of the stories took place. Unlike Thomas, they didn't have to assemble each asset of a location, as the whole location was already built. Whilst filming the episode Jinxed, ITV decided that the runtime of 30 minutes was too long for a child's attention span, and the decision was made to reduce episode runtimes down to 20 minutes. This didn't cause any problems, as only a small amount of filming had been done up until this point. So, scripts were readjusted to fit the 20-minute runtime, and filming finally entered proper production. The team involved had a huge passion for tugs, and everyone paid close attention to detail to make sure there were little to no inconsistencies. However, when nearing the end of production, a problem arose. TUGS had gone excessively over budget, resulting in a short hold for filming. Either an executive or Mitton himself decided the idea was to release 2 VHS tapes containing a total of 4 episodes and some merchandise to gain back the money. So, the VHS tapes, Sunshine and Munitions were distributed by Castle Vision to the public to help gain some money to finish the show.
Castle Vision is pleased to announce that it has just successfully concluded negotiations for the acquisition of the video rights to TUGS, a brand new series of children's programs from the producers of Thomas the Tank Engine.
These were released in 1988, a whole year before the show properly aired. These contained the full 20-minute edits and a big banner on the cover saying, "From the producers of Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends." Unfortunately, this did not help with aiming the show at an older audience, and probably made sales slightly weaker. However, the sales must have made enough money back as production began properly once again. TUGS finally finished production in December 1988, with all episodes completed. However, the chaos for the show had only just begun. Once TUGS finished production, TVS and ITV noticed a problem. The 20-minute runtime wouldn't work well alongside adverts, leaving a gap in their viewing schedule. Executives decided the episode should be cut down to 15 minutes, much to the crew's frustration. This meant large chunks of some episodes had to be cut out and even some dialogue changed in places. Whilst they already had 20-minute edits of 4 episodes, these also had to be cut down for TV airings. As for the rest of the episodes, it is believed they do have 20-minute cuts, but these have never been released publicly. The episodes were all now edited and assembled for their 15-minute runtime and completed for airing. TUGS finally aired on the 4th of April 1989, with all episodes being released up until the 27th of June that year.
We've also got another brand new programme starting tomorrow afternoon, which is TUGS, as Scally says. Yes, if you enjoyed Thomas the Tank Engine, you'll love this.
It also aired in many other countries. However, TUGS didn't quite have the same instant success that Thomas did. David Mitton and Robert Cardona really tried to push with the release of more merchandise, and they also wanted TUGS to reach a larger audience, mainly in the United States, as this was where the show was set. An American test dub of the episode Sunshine was made, and Robert Cardona went to the States to see if he could sell TUGS to a US market. However, nothing came of this, and TUGS never released in North America. Even though things weren't going swimmingly, David Mitton still had big plans for a second season of TUGS, which would take place upriver and leave the focus of Big City Port. However, in 1990 disaster struck when Television South filed for bankruptcy, believed to be due to TUGS' expensive budget. This didn't help Clearwater Features, as they had a stake in TVS. To make matters worse, a gentleman named Desmond Cox claimed Robert Cardona had stolen the idea of TUGS from him and filed a lawsuit. Whilst this didn't go any further than threats, and from what we know the lawsuit didn't go anywhere, it certainly put a large amount of pressure on Clearwater Features, and due to the bankruptcy of TVS on New Year's Eve 1990, Clearwater Features was liquidated and finally shut its doors to the public. TUGS' big ambition had caused David Mitton's company to depart forever. This is where Robert Cardona departed from David Mitton and left for Canada, only to release his own tugboat show called Viador Tugboat a few years later. David Mitton was lost. He now had no show or work. But an old friend came back to his rescue. Britt Allcroft returned back from her venture to the USA with the release of Shining Time, and it had been a great success. Not only had Thomas succeeded in the United States, but he was also popular in Japan and Australia. She wanted to make another series of Thomas with her new company, the Britt Allcroft Company. Britt didn't require funding from Clearwater Features now, due to Thomas's international success. But with Robert Cardona gone, this would be the first series where Britt was the sole producer. The show couldn't change style, and she wanted her old crew back. Britt agreed to hire David Mitton back as director, along with purchasing all the models and assets from TUGS, which were seized under liquidation. It is believed at this time, Britt and David's dispute had been settled, and it was finally time to bring the cheeky blue tank engine back to the screens with a much higher budget than before. But that's another story. Thank you very much for watching. A huge thank you to the Star Switcher for fact checking this script for me. He's the biggest TUGS superfan, and this wouldn't have been possible without him. I'd also like to thank the TUGS project, where a lot of these behind the scenes photos came from. They're a great team who recently restored a large amount of unseen TUGS photos from their original negatives. Thank you very much for watching. This video wouldn't have been possible without my loyal patrons. £1 a month and I do extra videos with some additional extras. Link in the description. If you've enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing or even leaving a like and a comment. It really does help the channel. I hope you all have a fantastic day and I shall see you in the next one.